Hello, everyone. Let's wait for a minute for people to join, then we will get started. All right, I think we can get started. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the October edition of Detection Highlights webinar series. I'm Ertuğ. I do product marketing here at VMware, and I'm joined today by my dear colleague, Patrick Stabman, team lead
Hello.
threat analysis. Hi, Patrick.
Hi.
Always great to have you. Um, so if you're new here, every month we share highlights from the labs team, the updates, new VMware threat identifiers. We use the acronym VTIs and YARA rules, new config extractors, and kind of things that help catch new emerging threats faster. That said, we only have time to go through the top highlights. So if you're interested in the full changelog, definitely check out the monthly blog post from our colleague Iza Kamarowska. It's up on the VMware blog right now. So a quick heads up, some housekeeping. This session is being recorded, and we send the slides and replay after, so you can share with friends, family. Drop your questions in the chat. We will cover them at the end. So with that, today, as usual, we will go through some of the new the VTIs and all of that. And of course, we will hand it over to Patrick at the end for the demo. And now, for just a quick note, actually, while a lot of what we do targets Windows malware, you see that this month there is a strong representation from the macOS side too. So especially in our YARA and extractor updates, we've got some interesting families like AtomicStealer, AMOS. I mean, same goes for phishing. Some of the VTIs we'll cover today are URL based, URL centric, so focused on phishing detection, not malware execution. So, but we treat them the same. If it is malicious behavior, we want to catch it. We want to make sure we give the complete visibility into that behavior. Also on this slide, you see, I mean, this split like VTI, YARA, extractor, but that's not really how we work. Often when we dig into a single sample, all three come together. You get a VTI update, a YARA rule. I mean, right, Patrick? So this is not the split what we see here is not reflecting the actual process. Probably it's more chaotic and more let's say like larger.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are way more steps involved than just maybe adding one VTI and the YARA rule. So usually, like when we start looking into that, we basically look into the families, look into new samples. We need to analyze them separately. We go deep into them, and based on your findings throughout this way, then of course we somehow also find the path on where we want to go, right? So on one side, maybe you need new VTIs to cover specific behavior that is shown by the samples, and on the other side, maybe we need to add new YARAs, improve existing ones, having a config extractor, maybe even adding new product features. So along this way, there are of course multiple different points relevant that can influence the process a little bit on how we're going to work on that.
Yeah, and I'm gonna start actually with VTIs and with one example of what we just try to explain. So let's go ahead and get started with the first VTI. So this one, for example, was created as part of our research around TOFC, a modular malware that covers everything from DDoS to crypto mining and also spamming. So, and back in June, actually, we added a config extractor for TOFC. Also, some Yara rules followed, but it really keeps queuing. So one of its modules queries services like, for example, Spamhaus to check if the victim's IP is on on blacklist. So if yes, it skips that IP, doesn't use it for spam campaigns, and it really sounds efficient. So we built a 3 out of 5 score VTI for that. And the MITRE tactic we mapped it to is a bit kind of different than usual. It's impact, since it ties into email bombing or spam, whatever you call it. But I will drop a link to also great write-up by Sert Polska, Poland, around this behavior. I mean, it's from a while back, but still very, very relevant. So let's stick with TOFC for a moment, the second VTI of today. This time it's about how it retrieves its C2 info. So if you're not familiar with the term, like that drop resolvers, it's kind of intermediary C2. So it checks them first to figure out, where to go next. And with TOFC, we observed connections to Steam related domains like Steam Power, Steam Community. I'm sure there are gamers in the audience being used as that drop resolver. So an ACR stealer is also documented using this method. I'm sure there are more. We are starting with Steam in this VTI, but expect to see support for others too, like Telegram. Payspin, for example, is one of the usual suspects. And also more tricky ones, more legit ones like Dropbox, Google, abusing these. They're trying to blend into normal traffic, but of course there are always other detection opportunities, right? And the detection score is 2 out of 5. Most probably will be increased after some monitoring, and before after some monitoring, probably it will be increased. And a small update at this moment before we keep going. Speaking of abuse legit services, and actually there's one more VTI that we are gonna kind of partially mention this. Observing a Gmail phishing campaign. We have added Google Sites, so sites.google.com. I'm sure some of you familiar, to smart link detonation recently. So it will be detonated if it is seen in an email. So it was kind of based on a customer feedback that it was abused heavily, especially to steal Gmail credentials. So it will be detonated automatically from now on. So next up, we have got phishing related VTI. That's actually again triggered by a customer request. This one detects OAuth authorization requests URIs commonly used by attackers. Recently, they're trying to trick users into giving access to their, all kind of enterprise related accounts, cloud accounts, via legitimate looking, flows. I would say, again, this is kind of the same pattern around abusing legit services. We have seen a good number of reports really recently, and state-sponsored groups, for example, leveraging this trick. There are some great reports. I would definitely recommend you to check out from Volexity and Elastic. I will drop those links in resources. We are going to share all these slides, including resources after the session. So in case you want to really dig deeper, you can see here there's a visual of the attack chain, whole attack chain, I would say. We don't have time, and really it's something really in detail explained here. But on our end, we look for URL patterns used by OAuth services like especially Microsoft, Google's. focusing on things like the presence of client ID, redirect URI, and other parameters attackers tend to manipulate and in the URL that they are sharing with the victim. You can see here actually where it sits in whole attack chain. So they are sending, I mean, there's also social engineering involved in this whole attack, and they are sending this link to the victim, and then yeah, all goes from there. It's low score. I mean, the story is long, but the score is low. 1 out of 5. More kind of informational. I mean, not really one of those verdict changing, but can be really useful and really relevant, especially in enterprise environments that we are all in, and also in targeted investigations around that. So that was it. And the last one is one of the highest scoring VTIs we added recently. And it's around a well-known, but still highly effective technique, APC injection. APC stands for asynchronous procedure call. I'm sure Patrick can jump in here to help us out what it is and give us more insights. But we have seen this used in many malware families. I will also drop a link to one of our analysis reports around StealC, and probably we will see that in Patrick's demo as well. So Patrick, I would be happy if you jump in for any additional insights around this.
Yeah, sure, of course. As you've mentioned, we will anyways see this VTI in action as well in a couple of minutes then in the demonstration part here. But as for the asynchronous procedure call injection technique, I mean, I think it's nothing pretty new, but it seems to be still quite prevalent and active, especially when it comes to evade detection. And this is some sort of very specific form of injection. So considering you have a process that is running and you want to inject into that specific process, and we all know each process consists of multiple threads, basically. And the asynchronous procedure call is something that each thread has a so-called queue where you can put into some of these procedure calls. And what malware or those samples are usually doing is they make use of that, and in one of the threads of a remote process, they are just going and put in a procedure call into that queue. And whenever this process then is going to continue its execution, because I mean, we know threads are sometimes paused, they wait for something, whatever. When this thread is going to execute for the next time, before they actually start running the code that they're supposed to do, instead, they're actually looking, is there any entry in that queue? And if there is any entry in the queue, in this case, what the malware, for example, put into that queue before, they are working on that queue first, and then they're going to continue the actual execution, what they are meant to do. So this is quite an interesting and let's call it stealthy technique that we have seen that seems to be quite active in evading typically monitoring approaches. And that's also the idea with that VTI here, that we're going to detect this properly and have a proper reporting on it as well. And of course, we are having a high score put on that VTI because it's, well, quite uncommon that someone is making use of that, especially to execute specific code. That's the reason why we put it into a 4 out of 5 category here.
Amazing. Nothing to add on my end. So thank you, Patrick. So we covered the VTIs, that we wanted to highlight in this session, and let's look at the config extractors and YARA rules front. Let's start with the YARA rules. Just a quick overview. You can see on the screen right now. So added again dozen of the YARA rules last month. And one thing to highlight, in recent months, we have added a significant really batch of new YARA rules focusing on Mac malware. And there is a good reason for that. We are hearing more and more about the Mac malware, especially one of them is AMOS, AtomicStealer. It kind of really continues to be the stealer of choice in the threat landscape, targeting the Mac OS. We have been tracking it for a while. We added multiple YARA rules over the last 6 months, and a config extractor also for it now. And Another one, there is another one, a funny name, Chili Hell, a more targeted backdoor, originally detailed in a Mandiant report in 2023. What is striking about it is it was notarized, so meaning it got past code signing checks, I think by Apple. So there is some great public research around it by JMF. If you're curious, I will drop the link in the resources again. And another one worth highlighting, Poseidon. Our friends at Red Canary published a really good write-up showing how threat actors adapted after their the vulnerabilities that they use were patched, moving from Poseidon to AMOS. They also pointed out the shared heritage, code base, and modules, anti-analysis techniques to make our lives harder, and behavior patterns across these families. So actually, I said our lives harder, but actually it's making, I think, your life harder, Patrick. So just feel free to jump in for any insights around the macOS threat landscape. I think it's going to be staying in our radar.
Yeah, definitely. So I totally agree with what you've mentioned. I mean, it's going to make our mice and my teams, and of course our team here at VMware, lives a little bit harder because, of course, that means we have more work to do. We need to look into them, we need to analyze them, and come up with proper detections. Of course, with the goal to make the life of our customers easier in the end, right? And I was also going to mention the blog post that Red Canary put out there because, as you've mentioned, between AMOS, AtomicStealer, Poseidon, and Odyssey Stealer, they have a lot of similarities, and they are, I think, quite difficult to different or distinguish between each other, because they essentially just came from the same code base, and they all have just some slight modifications. But I think Red Canary did a really good job in pointing out to the details that can be used to distinguish between these families. And I really believe that, well, macOS malware is going to be more and more relevant in the future as well. I mean, a lot of organizations are using Macs. That's definitely for sure. And I think also this sort of saying that Mac is usually more safer than Windows is also, well, slowly getting into a balance somehow, because there's more and more malware targeting macOS. I think a couple of years ago there were just less systems running on macOS. It just haven't had the same relevance that Windows did. But of course, now with a lot of organizations also moving to Mac, just makes it a way more interesting target for criminals. And that's why we're quite sure that we're going to see a continuous trend in increasing families that are going to target macOS systems.
Amazing. I think we might think about setting up another webinar, maybe just focusing on macOS malware. So to our audience, if you would like to hear more about this, please don't hesitate to reach out to us with your feedback. So yeah, I mean, moving on, the config extractors, I mean, there is really not much to talk about because I will not stand too much between a great demo from Patrick and you. But what I can say here, we added 3 new config extractors. One is, as I mentioned, AMOS, targeting macOS devices, ecosystem, and ValleyRat, another one, and StealC, all are really pretty active malware families. And I think with this, Patrick, we hit the mark around 45 families right now supported in terms of malware config extraction.
Yes, I think we are actually getting close to 50
Isn't that
already.
pretty good number?
Yes, that's a pretty good number. And actually, I mean, I'm not going to spoil much here, but keep tuned here, because we are also probably having a couple of additional updates, at least in our pipeline, that we're going to release in the near future. So we might even increase the number a little bit more in, well, let's say hopefully the upcoming weeks. So there might be something new coming as well.
Sounds great to me. And Patrick, I will pass it on to you right now.
All right, thank you. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen here, and I hope you can see that.
Yes, we can see it.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, for the demo part here, as we already discussed that we're going, well, we added a new config extractor for SteelC. Well, precisely speaking, not SteelC, but SteelC in its version 2. So SteelC is already a known malware family, and it recently got an update and they released SteelC with version 2. So I'd like to take a quick look here into the dynamic analysis report of VMware platform. In this case, I think we're going to look into an analysis that has been run on Windows 11. And well, we can immediately see that this is going to be flagged here as still C of version 2. Of course, this has lots of similarities with its former version of SteelC, but there are a couple of interesting changes. And specifically, I'd like to highlight the config extractor today. If we scroll down here through the report, we can see here actually the VMware threat identifiers, where as we can see a count of a total 57 rules have been triggered on that specific analysis, which is actually a lot. And they also made up 267 matches. So this is quite a lot of behavior that we can see. We can even expand this here and you just get an impression. This is a very, very big list on behavior that we can get out of this report. Before we're going to dive into that here, if we scroll a little bit down here, we see the config has been extracted that we're just going to take a look into a minute. And we see also quite a big process graph here that shows that there's lots of activity and behavior is going on. So this gives you a very quick and easy overview. In addition to that, we have the MITRE mapping here as well. And as you can see, there's a lot of things going on in the defense evasion section here, discovery, and also in the collection part. And that kind of matches with what I would expect from SteelC, because on one side it's a stealer. So on the collection side, we see here the input capture, screen capture. We see the discovery here of system internals, files, and directories. So that sort of matches completely. And on the defense evasion, we can also see that SteelC is, well, not putting that much effort, but at least they put a little bit of effort into trying to evade certain analysis tools. So this really provides you a very quick and easy overview on what is going to happen. But if we're going to take a deeper look here into the report, there's one specific remark message I'd like to highlight here. This is the anti-sleep triggered here in that case. So throughout this analysis, the sample was supposed to sleep for 5 minutes, and we actually just shortened and truncated this time to 11 seconds to really just see the relevant behavior. And this is quite interesting. I believe I recently looked a little bit into evasion techniques, and I think the sleep evasion is probably one of the earliest evasion technique that cyber criminals came up with. And the goal of that is very simple. So essentially you have a sandbox that only runs the sample for a specific amount of time. Let's say it's like 2 minutes, 4 minutes, whatever. And with that goal of the sleep, so they're trying to call sleep or any other related API call that's going to delay the execution, with the only goal, and that's about getting past the time frame where sandboxes usually do their monitoring and only execute the malicious behavior afterwards. So with, well, the ultimate goal that this is not doing anything and just reporting a clean verdict, because everything else is coming after that specific time where the sandbox no longer is going to monitor stuff. And of course, majority of security solutions and monitoring tools shouldn't have any issues with that. They should really be already able to sort of patch that stuff out and modify the system so that this doesn't make any changes and this doesn't really make an evasion. Although I'm not really sure why this is still being used, but I think in the majority of the samples, you actually still see that sleep is being used somewhere, just a couple of different forms and variants. If we look into the threat identifiers here, as mentioned, we identified that this is still C in its version 2 via our Yara signatures. And we see this signature triggering in a couple of different memory dumps in different processes. We can see here, well, there's MS Edge, so Microsoft Edge, there's Chrome, which is kind of interesting. And of course, we also see it in the initial sample itself, and we even seen the string artifacts that are usually related to the exfiltration data of SteelC. We see the malware config has been extracted from a memory dump that we have taken during the analysis. So this is something we're going to take a look in a second. Yes, here's also the APC injection that we've mentioned, which is just a really, really fresh and new VTI. So we can see here that the StillC process, which was process number 1, is going to inject with the asynchronous procedure call technique into a couple of browser processes. Like in this case, we have Chrome and Microsoft Edge. This is quite interesting, and we'll actually see this in a couple of seconds on why they are actually doing that. This is part of the config, and we can see that if they are going to, well, if they're trying to collect data from website itself, they somehow need to interact with the browser. And of course, they are doing this in a way that they are injecting code into the browser, into one specific thread, that is then going to query the web pages and trying to collect information from that during the user is going to browse the web. So this is where they use the APC injection technique for. Well, if we scroll, if we just look into another VTI here, of course, we see the data collection. That's what I've mentioned before. StillC, as its name already suggests, is a information stealer. So there's lots of relevant and related VTIs. We see here discovery for reading installed applications, taking screenshots. What else we have here? Searching cryptocurrency wallet locations, sensitive application data, and so on and so on. So there's a lot of different VTIs that are going to trigger on this specific behavior that StillC is trying to exfiltrate and steal the data. And related to that, we can also see that it's going to upload quite an unusual large amount of data via HTTP, which makes sense if, well, if HTTP is used as leaking, as a way of leaking, then of course they somehow need to upload this data somewhere that they're going to steal. We can see some sandbox detection stuff here, and so on and so on. And also, of course, interesting task scheduling, so usually meaning persistence. StillC makes use of a scheduled task to create persistence on the system. And if we at VMware, we are usually reschedule this task depending on, is it like triggered on a reboot? Is it triggered by time or whatever? We are usually triggering this task then depend accordingly to make sure that we can also reveal the behavior that is caused by the task. But anyways, the relevant point I'd like to focus here is the extracted configuration. So there is not that much that has changed from an extracted config point of view to StillC in its version 1 or in its initial version. We still get the URL, which is the URL to the command and control server. We get 2 encryption keys. The first one is used for the internal embedded strings into the binary itself. This is also that you need to extract the configuration from, because that's RC4 encrypted. And then we have another RC4 key that's going to be used to encrypt the network traffic. So as you can see, StillC just makes use of HTTP, which is plain text protocol. So if there is no proprietary protocol being used, you can read whatever data is being sent to the remote server. That's of course way easier from a threat actor's point of view to implement instead of using HTTPS, where you need certificates and it's way more complex to implement that. So they just use HTTP as a plain text protocol, and then they just RC4 encrypt the communication because that's usually quite simple. We can see this specific campaign ID for that sample, and we can also set expiration date. So StillC in its initial version and also in that version makes use of an expiration date, which is meant for that whenever this date has been passed, the sample no longer executes on that system. This is quite interesting, and we just try to, well, think a little bit about the reason behind that. And I think there might be 3 options, maybe even more, why they have implemented this. First option, of course, is that they can stay under the radar. So usually when this date has been passed and you analyze that file, the file is not supposed to execute anymore. So it just decrypts some strings, checks the date in the beginning, and then it just terminates. It's quite easy to bypass that. You can modify the date on your system if you know what date it's actually comparing against. You can even patch that out or whatever. The second option on why they have implemented this could be, in theory, that this is used to better control campaigns. So let's say that whenever you have a campaign and that campaign is ongoing, this could mark an end date of that campaign. So after that, you usually don't see the same campaign anymore because the sample is no longer going to run properly. And the third point that is just a theory, basically, but well, we don't really know the intentional purpose of that behind that. But it could also be possible this is used as some sort of licensing purpose. So let's say that you're going to buy still C, that you get still C for, let's say, I don't know, 6 months. And after this 6 months, your samples expire, and that's why they have this expiration date, and they no longer can be used and work after that anymore. So it's just an additional fact that you can use to track specific campaigns. And well, you can either modify your system if you want to execute that, or of course you can also just patch this specifically, because this string is just split up into chunks and then also RC4 encrypted with this key. So it's super easy to just modify that and play a little bit around with this. What I would like to focus now here is the RC4 key for the network traffic, because this actually provides pretty interesting insights into StealthC's operation that you usually don't really get if you don't have this one. So if this is going to be used to encrypt network traffic, we all can assume that there has to be some communication with its command and control server. So if we're going to take a look into the network tab here, and if we scroll down, we can see it communicated with a couple of systems. But this is the same IP as we've seen in the extracted config. It's the same URL that's being used, and we see there is actually plenty of communication with that IP address. And we can see it actually uses some post requests there. So we go to the pickup stream, which essentially doesn't show, yeah, which essentially needs to load here, and then it really gives you exactly the data that has been sent through the network traffic, through the network. And you can see here, this is just some header stuff. And here is the data that is the actual user content, which seems to be, well, in this case, base64 encoded, but of course that's RC4 encrypted, as I've mentioned before. So there's a small request being sent to the server, and there's quite a big response that's going to be returned by the server here. So what we can do here is we can just copy that stuff out and try to decrypt it on demand, because we have the data and we also have the encryption key, right? So that's what we're going to do here. I'm just using a tool called CyberChef here, and I'm just need to have an RC4 decryption receipt. So let's say we have the passphrase that's base64 encoded, and we also have an input that's also base64 encoded. So I've already pre-downloaded that stuff to make this a little bit fast, and I'm just going to drag and drop this in here. So you can see here, this is this for RNP, just to give you the confirmation that this is actually also what we're looking here. This is this for RNP, and it ends with AA and then the equal. So that's the data we have seen in the report. If you decrypt this, you can actually see that this sends to the remote server the build ID, the hardware ID, which is also used as an identifier. So whenever an specific and unique identifier for that machine, basically. And it has a type edit, which is named here create. So this essentially is something that we can call as a beacon. So that is the initial request from the infected machine that is being made to the command and control server that is going to register this machine there with this specific and unique hardware ID. And then we have the big response that I have mentioned. So this is like one response split up here into a couple of chunks. So we can also take a look into that. I've also already pre-downloaded it. So I'm just going to drag and drop that here. This is quite unreadable, but that's a JSON we can just let look a little bit better here. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. So this is the response from the command and control server. So it tells you, first of all, that the previous action, the registration, was successful. You get an access token. That's also an ID that's being used for command and control server communication. And then we get a couple of flags out of that. So it has a flag called self-delete. If any one of you took a pretty detailed look here into the report, there's also VTI that's going to trigger on that technique. There is this hide tracks VTI that's going to tell you that the sample itself deleted itself after the execution. So this is basically the instruction that the sample gets from the command and control server what it has to do. One thing is it has to delete itself after execution. We have enabled here taking screenshots, which also means that the sample has to take the screenshots during the execution. The loader flag is set to 0, which means that this sample currently only acts as a stealer and it does not load anything in addition to that. At least for now. It's going to steal data from Steam, it's going to steal data from Outlook, and then we have a huge list of browsers. So in this case here we have Google Chrome, Chromium, whatever version of Chrome that is, a couple of browsers that I haven't heard before, Vivaldi, Firefox, so there's Brave, lots of browsers in there. And here it also uses specific flags. So it has to pass cookies, logins, well, history seems to be irrelevant for that case here. And it also has to pass the web data. And for a browser or for a still C to pass web data, it has to somehow be part of the browser's process. And this is why we have seen the APC injection before into the browser processes. This is needed to be able to pass the web data, basically. We can even look further down. There is plugins. Well, if you know that this is all related to crypto wallet plugins. So this is the well, extensions, actually, browser extensions. This is the ID. So it's also going to target and steal, if available, a couple of crypto wallets from browser plugins or extensions. Same applies for files. So it just tries to find common file names and files on the local system for well-known crypto wallets, just to steal data from there as well. If we scroll down, there is also somewhere, I think, Telegram is somewhere in there. There is, what else do we have? Let's see, Discord, of course. There's some Azure stuff happening. We have, I think, OpenVPN, Proton VPN, files from the desktop and documents. So this is basically this whole instruction set, what the sample gets, so that it knows what it has to do, basically. If you continue looking into other post requests, because as you can see, there's many, many more, and lots of them are really sending out a lot of data. And what does it mean if it's going to send out of data? We know that this is going to be a stealer, right? So it has to collect data and then exfiltrate this data to its remote server. So in this case, I've picked another web request that has been sent to the remote server. Just see that this uses the same access token, and then there's a data added here with a file name, and then it uses the type upload file, so that really posts the file to the remote server. If we just grab that base64 encoded stuff, which of course was RC4 encrypted before as well. Oops, we want to decode it from base64. You can actually see here relevant information as well that has been collected on the machine. You see, well, it somehow didn't collect the IP and didn't add a country code here, but you can see the hardware ID, operating system architecture, computer name, username, local time, hardware related information, process count. So you can see there's 120 processes running on that machine and what these processes are basically, installed applications. So this is all collected during execution, and then it's exfiltrated to the command and control server. Let's grab one more here as an example. So we just also decrypt this one here, and then we just take out the base64 encoded string, which is a big chunk here again. And then let's see what we get shown here with this. And this is an SQLite database. And as you have seen, it also tries to collect cookies from browsers. And browsers usually make use of SQLite database to store session tokens, cookies, and all other related information. So this is just an example from one. As you can see here, I think, yeah, it tells you here the cookies, unique cookies there. So this is just another example from one of the browsers we have on our virtual machines. It's going to collect this database and also going to exfiltrate this. And the last one I'd like to show here is interesting because we have seen this, a similar one at the very beginning, type loader. So this one is now specifically flagged as type loader, which tells still C to act as a loader. So it finished its data collection exfiltration part. Now it acts as a loader. And if we look into the response that it got from the server, it gets some information, and that's essentially another IP address with a path that actually points to an executable with some additional information, and has probably a class ID. Run as admin is set to false here, so it's just regular execution. And then there's another executable that also is going to be downloaded and executed. If you take a look into the report here, we also see this behavior here in the network tab. So you can see this is the other IP address that has been used. And this is essentially this executable and the path that was flagged or returned by the command and control server to be downloaded and executed. And that's the second one here. I've taken a very, very quick look just before that webinar that I believe one of them actually turns out to drop xmrig as a minor. So whenever they are basically done with the data collection, exfiltration, they are dropping xmrig. Xmrig comes with a vulnerable driver that is also one of the reasons why it doesn't really need administrative privileges here to basically install and start cryptocurrency mining. And all of this information is super easy and simple to extract if you have the data that you need for that, right? And in this case, the needed data, all that we needed, well, is the encryption key that's used by StealC to encrypt the network traffic that is going to have with its command and control server. With that being said, I hope that this showed some interesting insights into the operations of StealC and also gives you sort of an idea on how valuable malware configuration extraction is, because you can not only use this for hunting and building your own threat intelligence, but you can also make use of that to do your own investigation, to better understand the operations on what they have done, and also what's the risk if, for example, you already investigate an unfortunately happened infection. So this should really provide you the data that you need to do your proper investigations on that. And with that being said, Ertu, I'm going to return to you.
Amazing. Really fantastic demo, Patrick. I was using the CyberChef only to time to time defang URLs, but I see that there is more to that. I have always I was suspicious that there is more to that than we see. We just witnessed really a great surgery to StealC and its internals. Really great insights. Thank you for that again. So then, yeah, we are gonna wrap up. Just a couple of more to mention. So the resources, I mentioned a lot, so we're gonna share it after the session. There are some great resources here you can go check out, and with the recording, of course, as well. And a couple of analysis reports here I'm dropping, so you can see it yourself, as well as a report from what just Patrick went through as StealC. So you can go ahead and check out. Yeah, now before we wrap up, let's see if we have some questions. And actually, I here there's one question. Are there any? Yeah, I think you mentioned this, Patrick. But are there any techniques the sandbox use to detect if a sample only activates at a specific time or date? I think this was the somehow related to expiration date that we see in the malware config extractor.
Yeah. So
but
yeah, I mean,
there are more configuration settings,
yeah. So this is, I mean, this is usually quite difficult, right? So either you see behavior or you don't see any behavior. I mean, in this case, it's pretty cool because even though StealC, for example, the expiration date would have already been expired and you execute it and run it in VMware platform, you still actually get the Yara matches and you still get the expected configuration, even though the sample terminates afterwards. So that's just one thing, right? So you still get a malicious verdict and you get the full config out of that. But of course, the goal is to provide a flexible environment to customers and to users. And that's why I can also modify the system date and the system time on our analysis environments. So whenever you're going to submit a sample and you say, well, maybe this has already an expiration date that's in the past, then you can simply during the submission process say, well, I would like the virtual machine to have its date set to, I don't know, let's say the 15th of June of 2024. So that's a super simple, easy configuration option you can just put in there. and then your analysis environment is really going to make use of that specific date. Yeah.
Great. So just another one, Patrick, around the usage of Sandbox in an on-prem environment. So how do they get these VTIs and all these updates? Like, is there a way? Does it need manual
Yes.
intervention or?
Yes, so VMware platform, of course, has the option to consume the signature detection update. So we usually aim to release our signature detection updates once a week. And this is, well, you can configure that, but this is in theory an automated process that's going to run in the background. So whenever you have a system, of course, that's not air-gapped, that's a different story. But whenever we have a system that's also, well, allowed to connect to specific addresses in the internet or to specific domains, then you don't have to do anything unless you want to reconfigure that. But it consumes the updates that we provide automatically on a weekly basis. So, well, users don't really have to take care of that anything. It's always going to be automatic.
Amazing. So I think that brings us to the end of our October edition of Detection webinar. Thanks so much for joining us today, and special thanks to Patrick for the great insights. Just a few final notes. We will be back next month, so you can mark your calendars, November 25th. And also a couple of events coming up in November for the folks in the East US. Check out CyberWorkCon in DC. VMware crew will be there. And Sans Cyberfest is approaching. Our colleague Albert Zikowicz will be presenting Lacrodactus research. So this one is virtual, so easy to register and join. As always, we will send the recording slides and links your way shortly after this session. So thanks again, everyone. Thank you, Patrick. Great demo,
Thank
great
you.
insights, and see you next time.
See you. Thank you.